Hello everyone, my name is Jim Garrity. The first video in this series about the windjammer was called Part 1. After a gush of creative brilliance, I called the second one Part 2. There's one more to come, but I'm not quite sure what to call that yet. Anyway, in Part 1 I showed you this. It's a skeleton of a windjammer. A device, when complete and placed over a microphone, can reduce wind noise pickup quite considerably. I also showed you how I made a foam dome that fits quite snugly over the wires. What about that for a fit? In this video, I will show you how I made this. This is the furry fabric cover, and it fits like this. Be careful, this is a video that contains some sewing. To make the cover, I had to use a sewing machine and also do some hand sewing. I'll probably never be allowed into the Male Chauvinist Pig Club ever again. I'm only being silly. I'm not in that club. I was, but I was thrown out last month, and all because of a little bit of nail varnish and some lippy. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the video at hand. It carries on from when the last one finished, which is kind of handy. I just completed the foam cover, and now I need a new template so I could cut out segments of the furry fabric to use to make a furry cover. Let us return to this very desk, but in the past where the story you are following will continue. I'm working on the template now for the furry fabric. The template for the foam is this template here. So what I did was I've traced that template and truncated the top 50 millimeters down. Now the reason I've done that is the furry top, the segments aren't going to come together as a point in the center. That's going to be too difficult to sew and get all these seams right. So what I'm going to do is put a hexagon of furry fabric here, and then all the segments will be sewn to it and then sewn to themselves down the seam, and the bottom is going to be left longer as well because I've got to hem that and also get some form of tie or elasticated strap at the bottom. So what I've ended up with is this. I have two templates. That's the actual sewing template, that the size that it's going to be. This is that sewing template which fits in the center, but also with a 20 millimeter seam allowance around the outside, and I've left the bottom long because this will get bent back or get folded back and hemmed, and there'll be an elasticated strip there. I'm not 100% sure how that bit's going to work yet. That's why I've left it so long. So using these two templates, which give the center line, then go around the first template, take that off, put the second one on, go around that, and that gives me the two patterns, one on top of each other. So around the outside is the cutting pattern for the whole piece, the whole segment, and that includes the seam allowance which is around the outside. So I've put that on there. Now it's red on this grey, so it's not going to be very easy for you to see, and now I've started to cut it. Now this furry fabric, you don't really want to just start hacking into it, or you cut the pile on the other side. So what you need to do is, as you put the scissors in, is hold the scissors up a little bit, push them through, and then just take a little cut and just try to cut the base, not all the fur on the other side. You know when you're doing it wrong because your nose starts to itch because all the fibres start flying around. So I'm doing just little snips on the inside of my line all the way around to the top. And these are I've got 4 marked out on this piece, and I need 6 for the first furry top. All 6 segments are now cut out, ready for sewing. You can see the outside is the outside of the seam allowance. The red line along here are the sewing lines, which I will be using once I get onto the sewing machine. Now the next thing I've got to do is make a hexagon that fits on the top. So I need a hexagon with its seam allowance, and then they will be, or one facet of that will be sewn onto each of the segments at the top. Next job. Lay out the fabric and cut a piece just large enough for one hexagon. Place the template on top of the rear of the fabric and draw around its outline. And now, snip, 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 and we have a furry hexagon. It's now time to start doing some sewing. I have two segments all pinned together along this edge. This is going to be the next edge I'm going to have a go at sewing. They're all lining up at the moment, so the bottom line here is level with the bottom line here, that point and that point, they're all lined up. So now let's bring in the sewing machine and give it a go. The time has come. All right, cotton is sticking out the back. Now I mustn't forget to bring the foot down. Push the material underneath. I've got to come just above that needle, that pin. So it's got to be there. Let's pull the pin out. Now, down with the foot. The foot is down. Let's see how we go. Pull the next pin out. And out with the next pin. I think perhaps I'm leaving it a little bit too late to pull these pins out. Yeah, reverse. And up the foot. Pull it out the back. And cut the cotton off. Now, how's that looking? So we sewed from that side, so we're on the spots there, and underneath we are on the spots. Woohoo! Inside, the hair's coming out. My dear, you're a marvel. Right, let's get on with the next one. Charged with the success of the first two seams, I blunder on. Anne has experience making furry teddy bears. She tells me to comb the fur away from the seam before sewing. If you don't do this, the fur may point into the seam and you have to comb it out once the sewing is done. Line up the seams, pin them together, then sew, remove the pins as I go. I carry on regardless, combing fur, pinning and sewing till all 6 seams are sewn together. All 6 segments are sewn together along their outside seams. Now the real test is, does it fit on the dome? It seems to be a little bit tight, just as it's supposed to be. We haven't got the hexagon on the top, of course, but that is fitting. That's fitting pretty good. The hexagon will fit on the top, and we've still got the 20mm seam allowance to take into account. But looking at that, so I think the next thing is to sew that hexagon in the top, and then work out how I'm going to fit the elastic in the bottom of this. Feels as though I'm getting close. I've got to go and show my wife. I'm pleased. Woohoo! Well, the main body of the furry cover is complete. The next thing to do is to hand sew the hexagon, which I have here, onto the top of the dome. Yeah, and so this is going to be hand sewn. I've got the cotton and a needle here, and give me these. I must admit, I'm more comfortable with a lathe or a milling machine than a sewing machine. But that's what the job requires, so that's what we've got to do. First thing to do is comb the fur away from where the seams are going to be sewn. I do the main cover first and then the hexagon. Now, once the cover is inside out, I can pin the hexagon in position on top of the cover. Sewing next, it takes ages. We'll come back to this once I've finished. The hexagon is now sewn in the top. It looks all right from the inside. I haven't turned it inside out yet. And I also haven't cut the corners. I've been told that I'm going to have to cut the corners to get these to lay flat, and that will stop lumps forming. Right, let's see if our furry dome fits on top of our foam dome. Oh, fingers crossed. Well, do you know, actually, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. You can just see the seams. I haven't combed anything yet. I assume if I get to those joints with a little brush, we will make those invisible. Look at that. Well, another milestone passed. I've been playing with the dome and I now have it all sorted out. The piece of elastic that Anne gave me first of all, it turned out to be too tough for this job. So this has gone to one side and that will go back into Anne's offcut box. She had another rummage and she's come up with this, which is 20mm wide elastic, and this is exactly what we want. On the dome itself, I've folded back a hem along the lower edge, and it gives me a pocket which is 40mm deep. Now, this is where the elastic will end up. So it's actually 4 pieces thick here, but that shouldn't matter. And I've got a pin on each of the segment joins to hold it all together. So the next thing to do is sew along here by hand on all 6 segments and across the joints, leaving one open. Now that one that you leave open, the elastic, you put a safety pin through here, push it down, and you keep feeding it through this hem all the way round until it pops out again. Now at that point, the circumference of that dome has been taken into account. This is 700mm long, and if I overlap these ends by 150mm, that gives me sufficient stretch to hold this in place. So that's the idea. When both ends come out, you pull the elastic out to give you plenty of space like this. You measure the overlap. When it's at 150mm, we sew along here, snip the ends off, tuck that back in. I'll then check it over the foam dome, and if everything's okay, I'll then sew that last segment up, and that's it. The job is done. The only other thing I did is on the top of the dome, where the hexagon is, the joints, where the corners come, I've cut those down here. I haven't cut them right into the corner. I've left about 5mm proud so it doesn't dig into the corner and form a hole later. So that is it. I now need to get my needle and start sewing the hem against the bottom of the dome. I've also cut the corners for the top of the segments as well, and they match where the hexagons were cut, and that's all to try and keep the bulk down once the furry dome is placed on top of the foam dome. Hand sewing the hem now. This doesn't take too long as the stitches you make are quite large. Only 5 of the 6 segments are sewn, the 6th one is left open. This is where the elastic will be inserted and sewn to make an internal loop. The hem is sewn all the way around except for one segment which has been left open. And now what I need to do is feed the elastic all the way around the hem. Now, I haven't got a safety pin, but I do have a piece of 18 gauge tin copper wire which I've bent in half and made my own safety pin here. So now I can hopefully feed this through the hole that I've left. Before I started to insert the elastic, I needed to know how long it had to be to hold the furry cover in position, but not to be too tight. I held the elastic around the wires just on top of the support ring and worked out the perfect length. The elastic Anne gave me is too long by about 150mm, that's 6 inches. I left it this length as it's going to be the first cover so I can make sure it fits before it's cut. As I feed the elastic around the hem, I make sure it doesn't twist as this would form a lump in the side of the cover. Once the elastic appears again, I pull the ends and sew them together with a 150mm overlap. The elastic is in. I've sewn it off. Now what I need to do is just stretch the dome, looks like a hat, my wife, she keeps calling it a hat. And now the big test. Will the furry dome fit over the foam dome? I wouldn't like to say that after a couple of beers. So if it's on top like this, I can feel the elastic stretching and it's feeling tight. Pull this down to the edge here. Last job now is to sew up that last segment and I think it'll be finished. We are all done. The elastic is inside that hem and the hem is sewn up nicely all the way around. The furry cover is over the top of the spring steel and the foam dome. So that's all done. The elastic holds it nicely in place all the way around, and I've fitted the base as well. So that is complete. The prototype windjammer is complete. I'm happy now that I can make the foam domes and the furry covers. Foam and fur have both arrived, so it's time to get on with the production of 21 foam domes and 21 furry covers. Well, production time has started. I got a nice roll of foam in through the post. Started yesterday and I've made 1, 2, 3, and come here, and 4 of them. Now, I've got 21 to make altogether. So with these 4, I've got 17 left. And if you multiply 17 by 6, which is the number of segments we've got in each of the domes, it means that I've got 102 of these little segments to mark out, cut, and then glue together. I better get on with it. And on with it I get. I haven't speeded this video up. This is my normal work rate when I'm working at 110%. Now look at the pile of foam segments I must glue together. There's millions of them. The foam segments will be glued together in pairs first. I use the spout of the tube to spread the adhesive on a single side of each segment. Once the adhesive has dried for 12 minutes, it's time to push the pairs of segments together. I make sure all the joints are sound and then apply the adhesive to the sides of the pairs of segments. Another 12 minutes later and I can push them segments together and build a whole foam dome out of 3 foam pairs. All 21 foam domes are complete and piled up there on the back of the workbench. We've got the prototype in front, which is also complete. The next job is onto furry covers. Now I've got a little bit of material left over from the prototypes. Well, when I say a little bit, enough to make 5 furry covers. Of course, I need 21. The fur is on order, and that should be coming in the next couple of days to finish that off. As I'm using up the last of the furry fabric, the new delivery arrives. I get stuck into that, cut all the segments, pin them together, and start to make the rest of the furry covers. I managed to work out how to use a sewing machine to sew the hexagons in place. That saves a bit of time, but the hem for holding the elastic must be sewn by hand, and helps with this and sews most of the hems in place. All in all, each cover takes just over an hour to produce, from a furry sheet to an elasticated cover. And then at last there are 21 furry covers, all ready to be pulled onto 21 assembled windjammers. As I finish the stretch covers, the aluminium plate arrives that I'll be using to manufacture the support rings and the base plates. In the next and the last video in this windjammer series, I will show you how I manufacture the support rings and then assemble the 21 windjammer units. I'm glad to say making the foam domes and the furry covers is all over. It took about twice as long as I thought it would, but I learned something new, and that's always a good thing. In the next and the last video in this windjammer series, I will show you how I manufactured the support ring and then assembled the 21 windjammer units. And with that, this video is at an end. Take care everyone. See you next time. Could you do something like this? Of course you can.